Good afternoon, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. In light of this recent attempt by the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian government in Gaza to interrupt Israel's Univision festival, to try to embarrass Israel, to try to discourage tourism by firing all those missiles into the state of Israel, the thing goes on, and it compels me to want to comment on my own Gaza story, if you will. Back in the 1980s, I spent some time in Israel working at a spice factory near the border of Gaza. Doing manual labor basically. Wanted to spend time there. I had relatives there. I did a bunch of things in Israel. It was a very interesting trip. And this was before the Intifada, when there was generally good relations between the Jews and the Arabs, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, at the factory, there was about half of the employees were Israeli, and the other half were Gazan Palestinians who would come in every day to work at the factory. And of course, the foreman at the factory told me, because they happened to be my cousin, he told me that I was not to discuss politics with anyone. And but of course, eventually I did talk politics, and I did befriend the Palestinians more than the Israelis, and I talked with them. I mean, I'm the inquisitive American, not necessarily politically correct, not necessarily conscious of certain realities, the American tourist. Um, and I got some very interesting impressions from getting to know the Palestinian men. First of all, my sense was that they admired Israel, that they liked Israel, but at the same time, they wanted to have a sovereign Palestinian state in Gaza, which was something that made sense to me at the time and something that I respected. I also noticed that the relationship between the Israelis and the Palestinians, these are all youngish men, probably in their 20s, early 30s. They got along. I mean, they played practical jokes on each other. I wouldn't say they were best friends, but people, there was kind of a camaraderie there. I mean, people were all there to work, and they kind of would play these funny tricks on each other, and they kind of generally got along quite well. Um, and my impression is that this was the average condition of Palestinian Arabs, whether they be in Gaza or the West Bank, that they are, in many ways, they're culturally Israeli. They're relatively educated. They're Western thinking. They believe in business. They want democracy. They want prosperity. They want individual realization. They might be nominally Muslim, they might even be nominally Christian, but they were more Israeli than probably, and certainly even now, most likely Arabs in any other country, because they were part of the Israeli culture, and generally they admired Israel. The problem entered into the scene, and this happened after I had already left. This was about maybe a year later, the beginning of the Intifada and the first Gulf War, and Saddam Hussein firing Scud missiles at Israel. It was a very hard time. Um, is that their leadership was not interested in creating a sovereign Palestinian state in Gaza. Their leadership wanted to use Gaza as a launching pad to try to destroy the state of Israel. And that's exactly what they attempted to do several years later, after the Intifada, when Ariel Sharon, pretty hawkish prime minister of Israel, basically turned Gaza over to the Palestinian Authority. He did so on a silver platter. Not only did they turn Gaza over, but the Israelis helped train the Palestinian police force so they could function in Gaza, they could develop the basic infrastructure of government. These were very sophisticated people who were going to run Gaza. And they even went a step further in that they evacuated all of the Jewish population of Gaza. They made Gaza Judenrein, as the Nazis would say. No more Jews, right? Ethnic cleansing. And that meant about 5,000 to 7,000 Israelis had to evacuate their farms, their businesses, and basically turn them over to Palestinians, which they did. The Palestinians received, fully functioning businesses as the Israelis had to leave and go back, go into the state of Israel. And, there's a whole sad story there that's never really been told, which is that, we're talking about people who really never found their footing again in many cases. They were uprooted and they had to go back to Israel. And the Palestinians, of course, within a short period of time after obtaining complete and total sovereignty in Gaza, with promises for more. I mean, the Israelis had also given the same sovereignty to the city of Jericho and the area around it. And there was plans to go further, as hopefully they were hoping that this would turn into a responsible, sovereign Palestinian state. The money was pouring in from all over the world into Gaza. And by the way, when we talk about Gaza, we're talking about beachfront property. This is not a poor place. Don't buy propaganda that says that they're poor and they're suffering. Gaza was a thoroughly modern city. It was about the same on par with any Israeli city. And they had the opportunity to create a very prosperous enclave there. It could have been like Hong Kong or Singapore, if they had played their cards right. And if they had done so, and they had done so living peaceably alongside Israel, then once again, Israel was prepared to do a lot more. But unfortunately, what happened in Gaza is that Hamas took over. I think it killed about 200 Palestinian Arabs from the Palestinian Authority. And it then proceeded to use Gaza as a launching pad in an aggressive war against the state of Israel. They proceeded to fire an estimated 6,000 missiles into Israel. They were receiving this shipment of weapons from Iran that Israel stopped off the coast. There's the Corzine B case, I think it was called. They continued to smuggle in weaponry so they could engage in a war against Israel. Again, we're talking about Israel proper here. We're not talking about administered territories or anything else. And then, of course, this eventually would turn into real war with terror tunnels. They took the money that the world community gave them, that the Israelis gave them, quite honestly, and they used it to build these concrete tunnels and to buy weaponry and to get weaponry. And meanwhile, the economy was stagnant because they were at war, their own aggressive war. And eventually, they've now resorted to somehow smuggling missiles in and firing them at Israel and flying gas balloons over to kill as many Israelis as possible and building the terror tunnels. I had an Israeli on this program maybe a couple of months ago, and I just asked him, how is it that Gaza is able to obtain these lethal weapons? Aren't they being blockaded? And he really didn't have an answer to that question, but somehow they are able to do it. And so they've tried to embarrass Israel right at the moment when they're trying to promote this international event, the Eurovision concert in Tel Aviv, and trying to encourage tourism and business to come into Israel, which is what any normal nation does. And I just think that we should note that when they talk about Palestinian sovereignty, they have sovereignty. They have it in Gaza. Look what they've done with it. They also have it, maybe less literally, but they do have it in large portions of the West Bank, or what I would call Judea and Samaria, because those are the traditional names of those territories. And I mean, maybe there's some kind of a truce there, but we'll see what happens. But if Gaza is any indication of what could happen if Israel grants more sovereignty, then the prognosis is not good. And no sane nation would open itself up to that kind of a threat. So that's my personal experience, my Gaza story, if you will. And my takeaway from it is that the average Palestinian Arab generally would like to have peace with Israel. They admire Israel and Israeli society, but they want to have a state. And the reason they don't have a state is because of the radical extremist leadership that sees them as nothing more than cannon fodder in their war to destroy the state of Israel. It's not enough for them to have a state. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. You're welcome to subscribe on my YouTube channel and check out my books. They're available at Amazon.com. Have a great afternoon.